Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Mahua Nigurkar. I'm an assistant professor with the School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Today we are going to do a very important module, and that is social work with children. This module comes within the paper called Fields of Practice. I hope you have read part 1 and part 2 of this module. This module is part 3, Social Work with Children. In part 1 and part 2 of the module, to give a very quick recap, we looked at the differential understanding of childhood, different approaches, perspective, theories of working with children, why we need to work with children, what is vulnerability, marginalization. We looked at some terms related to violence, abuse, exploitation, how some of the children are either victims or survivors of violence, abuse, exploitation, and very briefly which touched upon the responses, the different responses of various stakeholders, right from family to the state, towards situations and issues of vulnerability and marginalization being faced or experienced by children. Now let us move on to module 3. That is part 3 of this module. So what will this module cover? This module will cover, so part 1 and part 2 of the module, as I mentioned, has given us a broad understanding of child and childhood and categories of vulnerable and marginalized children. Now part 3 of this module will include discussion around the following areas. First area is, what is the scope of social work intervention with children, and also the work with families within the context of children. The second thing that this module will cover is also the variety of work that one can do across different levels and across different settings. Then we will also touch upon very briefly some of the essential skills required by the social worker who is planning to intervene or engage in children's issues directly, indirectly, at different levels and across different settings. While different settings may require certain specialized skills and knowledge very unique to that setting, depending on the issues that that setting is working with, there is a core set of skills that is required for all social workers, irrespective of which setting they may work with. And we will come to that in a little while from now. And finally, we will summarize some of the main points of this module. Now moving on to what is the scope of social work intervention when we are looking at working with children as an important field of practice. So social workers, when they are working with children, what do they build their practice on? Ultimately, skills will not come out of a vacuum. Skills, perspective, approach, they are all based on a range of theories, perspectives, approach, knowledge building, research, and practice skills in the field. So when we are planning to work with children in the field across different age groups, the first thing that we need to do is equip ourselves with all relevant knowledge that is important for the world of children. And then, of course, we can develop further skills as we engage directly with them. Then there is also importance to ensure that we are able to comprehensively assess the child's situation. Now, assessment is not a one-way process. Assessment is a two-way process where the child that you're working with, the youth that you're working with, the family that you're working with, participate in that process of assessment. So assessment is not an arbitrary one-way process where we as adults decide what is best for the child. Yes, of course, we will have to take some of those critical decisions, but that decision will be based on encouraging the child to participate in an age-appropriate manner. Now, why does assessment become important? With assessment, we gain an understanding of the immediate needs of the child. We gain an understanding of what the long-term vision that we need to keep while working with children. Because there will be some critical needs that need to be met urgently, and there will be long-term goals for the child. Let's say, for example, a child has been rescued from a situation of child trafficking, and the child is sitting before us, and while we speak with this child, we notice that the child is not feeling well. When we inquire further, we realize that the child could be probably coming down with a high fever and probably some serious illness as well. So at that time, the critical need is medical attention for the child. Critical need is psychosocial support, emotional support, and thereafter we can go on planning all the other things that we will require. So whenever we are assessing a child's situation or the situation of a youth or a family, we really require to know what is the immediate things that we need to do, and that knowledge will come to us only when we do a very thorough understanding, assessment and analysis of the situation. And I would like to emphasize here, along with the child's participation, and something that is mutually relevant and beneficial. Then we move on to the next part, and that is moving on to some more areas in terms of scope of social work intervention. Now, if you look at the scope of social work intervention, because as I covered in part 2 of this module, social work with children, that there is a large number of children in society. Now, the number of services available for them or the number of resources available for them is quite few and often scarce and does not adequately reach out to each and every children. Hence, what happens is that social workers have this responsibility of direct work with children. Now, direct work with children can be at different levels. First of all, what is direct work with children? Direct work with children is we do one-on-one individual work with children, we do group sessions, we do group meetings, we do community-based work with children, something in which we are directly engaging, communicating and intervening in the lives of these children. Now, there is a range of direct work with children and several options and opportunities. First of all, let me again reiterate, which we have reiterated in part 1 and part 2, that when we are referring to children, we are referring to all young persons who have not completed 18 years of age. So when we are looking at social work with children, we are looking at social work with very young children, infants, toddlers, school-going children, adolescents, older adolescents, and yes, young people who are almost on the verge of adulthood. Now, depending on the needs and critical areas of fulfillment for each and every age group, we can plan a range of direct work with children. Also, along with direct work with children, we can also work with staff in an organization on policies and programs which will reach out indirectly to the work with children that they are doing. Thereafter, we can also move into fundraising. We can write about child-related issues to generate awareness and increase sensitivity. We can work on law-related areas either through direct practice as a lawyer or through participation in legal literacy and awareness. We can work with concerned advocacy groups, networks, campaigns. We can work with relevant state departments, participate in policy-making dialogues, debates, discussions and processes. Work can also be preventive in nature, or we can have a very long-term vision and goal. And very importantly, work can also be based on crisis intervention. So direct work with children, yes, as I repeat, we can do one-on-one work and we can do a variety of things that reaches out to the children that these organizations and groups are working with. Now let us further delve into direct work with children some more. Many of us in the field of social work with children are inclined towards direct work with children. It could be our own interest, our aptitude, our sensitivity towards children's issues, and a deep desire to directly contribute and engage meaningfully. Now, what kind of work can we do? Well, we can do developmental work, we can do preventive work, we can do therapeutic work. It depends on our own experience, our knowledge, the organizations that we are based with, what is their focus area. So the spectrum of social work with children is very wide, very vast and very diverse, and there is immense scope for all of us to engage meaningfully. It depends, as I said, on our aptitude, experience and knowledge. Direct work with children can be undertaken in different ways in different settings. For example, to give you a few examples, we can do social work with children in schools. We can do social work with residential care children, that is, children who are growing up in children's institutions. We can also do social work in shelter homes, contact centers, drop-in centers, community-based centers. We can do social work in a variety of education-related projects. We can do social work with organizations who are seeking volunteering support to teach children, mobilize groups of children in communities. We can do social work in vocational training centers, child guidance clinics, child growth centers, child mental health centers. So as I mentioned, the range is vast. And some of us, yes, will be professionally trained, qualified social workers, but that does not limit us in this sense that suppose we are professionally trained, qualified social workers in one kind of specialization, nothing stops us from intervening in social work with children, because all of these social issues and social interventions in one way or the other are connected to each other. Similarly, we may be trained in something else. We may not be MSWs, we may not be trained social workers, but we may be having an abiding interest in children's issues. We can always volunteer for a range of direct work with children in different organizations who are looking for such volunteering support, and we can do some amazing work, build our skills along the way, and if we get interested, of course, get further trained in this sector of work. Now moving on to one more topic, that is a large number of children without family or family support come within the purview of the juvenile justice system. Now in some of the other modules on social work, you would have come across the juvenile justice system, the Juvenile Justice Act, what its objectives, vision and goals are. So I'm not going into that. Please do read up on the Juvenile Justice Act and the Juvenile Justice System, because this is a huge, one of the largest machineries and one of the largest response of the state towards children without family and family support. Now within the juvenile justice system, there are two categories of children or two large groups of children who come as mandated by the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. Now these two categories of children are A, child in need of care and protection, and B, child in conflict with law. The largest number of children who come within the juvenile justice system are child in need of care and protection. So who are child in need of care and protection? If you go back to part 2 of this module, you would have heard or read about the different categories of vulnerable children who are without family or family support. For example, children who have been orphaned or destitute, children who are missing, rescued from trafficking, rescued from exploitative child labor, compelled into begging, street living or street connected children, children who are being compelled into drug peddling, children who are being compelled into child prostitution. So there is this range and this huge number of vulnerable children who are without family and family support. Now, at that point in time, when they are without a family or family support, the state requires to play that guardianship role till it is decided as what should be the next best course of action for these children. So these children come under the juvenile justice system as child in need of care and protection. And there is this huge mechanism thereafter which addresses the unique needs of each of these children. So the children may go into institutional care, the children may go for rehabilitation, and of course the children may also get restored to their families or repatriated to their hometowns. Now another group of children, which is a much smaller group in number, but nonetheless a very, very significant vulnerable group of children to work with, and that is child in conflict with law. Now, who are children in conflict with law? Well, these are children under whom there are alleged offence charges. So these are children wherein they have been charged with offences which could come under probably sections of the Indian Penal Code or state laws or special laws or local laws and so on and so forth. Now, child in conflict with law are young persons who are less than 18 years of age and have alleged offence charges. The Juvenile Justice Board addresses the situations of these children, and there is a certain mechanism for them. Do read up the Juvenile Justice Act. But one thing we need to understand, all children who come within the juvenile justice system, irrespective of whether they are child in need of care and protection or child in conflict with law, the overarching philosophy and principle of the Juvenile Justice Act and the juvenile justice system is rehabilitation and social reintegration of each and every child. So there is a huge scope of social work intervention within the juvenile justice system. We can directly work with both these categories of children. We can work with the Child Welfare Committee, the Juvenile Justice Board, or we can be part of NGOs and organizations who are interfacing with the juvenile justice system. We can also be involved as functionaries, as volunteering support, maybe within the large scheme called the Integrated Child Protection Scheme, ICPS, which has this mandate of effectively implementing the juvenile justice system. So if you are interested in the juvenile justice system and issues and larger issues of child protection, do read up the Juvenile Justice Act and do read up the Integrated Child Protection Scheme to get clarity on where all you would like to participate. Now let us move on to yet another area, and that is some more work in terms of which are the other options in terms of direct work with children. So we've already spoken about schools and mental health, child guidance clinic. We've spoken very briefly about the juvenile justice system. There is another huge area of work in the area of non-institutional services or alternative care. The basic philosophy within child protection system is that institutionalization of children must be absolutely the last resort for children. And it has been ideally accepted that families and communities and kinship care is the best place for the child to grow up in. Of course, there would be some children who will still require institutional care for a variety of reasons, but for the remaining group of children who may be without family or family support, institutionalization must be the absolute last resort. And hence, to prevent children from institutionalization, we can look at the scope of social work within non-institutional services or alternative care, such as adoption. There is a lot of work to be done in adoption. Adoption would be considered as one of the ideal ways of rehabilitating a child with family. A child's right to a family gets fulfilled through a legal process, and a family also now legally has a child whom they can care and nurture. Then we have foster care, we have sponsorship, we have aftercare facilities. So there is this range of work that one can do within this wide spectrum of non-institutional services or alternative care. Then we have yet another area where there is critical social work required, and that is the area of crisis intervention, trauma counseling, critical care for children who have been in some kind of severe and acute distress and trauma, where some of their critical needs are to be met, some of their psychosocial and emotional needs have to be immediately met before we move on to other areas of rehabilitation. Now let us move on to some more other areas of looking at what else can we do rather. We have already touched upon a wide spectrum and scope of social work intervention. What else can we do when we are looking at children's issues or when we are looking at intervening with social work with children? Now, working with children would entail a variety of things. So we can work very briefly, please read this write-up also to get more details of this module, but very briefly I would like to touch upon that we can work on the physical, social, psychological and emotional needs of children. As I mentioned earlier, very important for us to identify the areas of vulnerability and the risk factors in the child's life. We also need to look at whether immediate crisis intervention is required, especially for children who have been victims or survivors of abuse or exploitation, and then appropriately plan for rehabilitation. A very important point that I would like to touch upon here is direct work with children does not entail only working directly with the child. We will need to work with family and other significant adults in the child's life because the child is dependent parent, on the family and other significant adults. So there is a range of work that we can do with family. Do read up the write-up for further details and information. We can also work within the legal framework, and then after doing an assessment, after doing a risk analysis and deciding what would be the ideal way, or rather the most appropriate way for intervention, we can also take recourse to child-related laws and other laws if especially there are perpetrators involved and there have been offences and crimes committed against children. Then we can plan for short-term goals and long-term stability and a long-term rehabilitation. And as I said, the overarching philosophy, objective and vision of child rights in India is social reintegration. One thing we need to keep in mind when we are doing all of this work is being culturally sensitive and being sensitive to the cultural context of the child, understanding the child in the context of their life situation and planning appropriately. Now let us move on. As we move on towards the end of this module, as I mentioned, that we need to work with the child's family and we need to work with other significant adults. These significant adults could be parents, okay, within family, non-related adults, it could also be teachers, it could be other social workers, it could be the police, a very, very important stakeholder in the lives of children without family and family support, because it is the police who bring the children within the juvenile justice system, so the police becomes a very important stakeholder. Then teachers, mental health professionals, professionals working within hospital settings and so on and so forth. Working with parents or working with the families, we can look at different areas of economic hardships, if any, financial crisis, monetary difficulties, physical or mental illnesses, strife within the family, domestic violence within the family, and then we can also look at enhancing parenting skills, communication with children. How do parents, how do family members communicate with children that encourages children to give their best and that encourages children to talk about problems and difficulties that they may be facing. If we are able to train, guide significant adults into sensitive counseling skills which helps children talk about their problems, then many of these problems can be sorted out at the level of the family itself. And this child does not have to come out as a child in need of care and protection and come within the purview of the juvenile justice system. So preventive work is most crucial. After the harm and damage is done, at best we can do rehabilitation of the child. Now let us move on to one more topic or one more short point, and that is, what is the other range of macro work that we can do? At all of this while, I was speaking of the range of direct work we can do with children, or the different things that we can do which reach out to direct groups of vulnerable children. Now, very briefly to touch upon, and do read up the write-up for more details, we can do other kinds of work also. Some of us may be not so much inclined towards directly working with individual children or groups of children, but we are very much sensitive to children's issues and we want to do something about it. So then what else can we do? Well, first of all, we can work with different state departments, different groups which the state has initiated, different alliances that the state may be closely working with on a variety of children's issues and raise awareness at that level. Then we have commissions, human rights commissions, child rights commissions. We can involve ourselves with these commissions and raise awareness on children's issues. These commissions are monitoring bodies to ensure that violations of human rights and child rights are not happening. And if there is a violation, then what would be the redressal mechanism? So we can involve ourselves in these kind of commissions, which is like an overseeing body on issues of human rights violations, or rather protection of human rights and child rights. Now, within civil society initiatives like networks and NGOs, one can also work with children either directly, or one can engage with such civil society initiatives and networks into areas like fundraising. If we have skills, if we have knowledge on issues of management, on issues and areas like governance, these are very, very critical areas, because for any kind of social work program or intervention to work well, you need a variety of things things to be done at different levels for that intervention to work well at the field level. So for direct work in the field with children to work well, you have to look at monitoring of the project, you have to look at issues of management and governance, you have to look at issues of funding, you have to look at the knowledge base and capacity building of people who are going to be working in different levels. So many things and many supports and structures would be required so that the work out there in the field is effective and children get meaningfully benefited from that work. One more area of work, and that is training and capacity building, or rather let us say skill enhancement programs for a range of functionaries, frontline social workers, government officials, lawyers, other very significant adults in the police, in the health sector, all of them who are directly or indirectly working on children's issues. So what is the sensitivity, what is the level of awareness that we can generate across stakeholders so that work can happen meaningfully across these settings? Lastly, as I've mentioned earlier, networking, collaboration, advocacy, campaigns, all of these things we can do very effectively. We can also very effectively use the social media and raise awareness about issues of children. Now the last point before we conclude this module, and last but nevertheless one of the most important points, and that is, as a social worker, what would be the skills that would be required when we are working with children or when we are looking at social work with children as an important or significant field of practice? Now, social workers base their work on core social work values and principles. Within the context of children, working within a framework of principles and values becomes especially very important. And if you look at part 1 and part 2 of the module, we have discussed why this becomes so much more important when we are working with children and young people. Some of the fundamental child rights principles are based on best interest of the child, non-discrimination, child's right to life, child's right to participation, very critical. So then what is a skill? A skill is a level of proficiency or an expertise with which we do something. Skills do not operate in a vacuum. Skills have to be based on sound knowledge, values, principles, and of course our own aptitude and level of proficiency with which we interact or engage in the field. Now there would be a range of micro to macro skills, and we have covered some of these skills in this module discussion on social work with children. So we need to look at which is this range and what is this continuum of micro to macro skills that we are talking about, and the write-up will give you further details. So right from directly engaging with children and having micro skills, we move on to macro skills of policy formulation and bringing about large social work changes. Now to summarize this module, what does this module cover? This module covered the range and scope and variety of social work intervention across settings, at different levels. What is the different kind of direct work we can do with children? What is the macro level intervention we can do with children? To be able to develop ourselves as an effective social worker, to be able to develop ourselves as a skilled individual, what kind of preparation we need to make in terms of our knowledge building, attitude building, perspective building, and most importantly, the right kind of approach, a child rights-based approach that looks at larger issues of discrimination, inequality, and finally our overall goal should be, and of course would be, that all children grow up in an atmosphere of care, nurturance, in an atmosphere of safety, security, child protection. This not only ensures that all children are leading happy lives as children and young people, it also ensures that these children grow up as happy, constructive, well-meaning adults, and the amount of care we take for the youngest members of our society also reflects on us as a state, as a nation, and as a society, as our commitment towards children. Thank you.